Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm very pleased to have been asked to provide the closing remarks of this timely and innovative conference. AAC&U has provided this space for visionary, inspirational, and concrete thinking that you're doing to bring about the changes we need in higher education for student success. And I do want to thank Tia and her staff for the superb planning that made this possible. This is extraordinary. So I floated around the conference these days, and given the poster session and concurrent sessions, it is apparent that you arrived here as faculty and administrators committed to improving higher education and responsive to the changing demographics and deep-rooted issues in our nation, our institutions, and higher education. I hope that the opening keynote, the student plenary session, your sessions in this conference, and my closing remarks will guide us to find ways to sustain the work you are doing at your institutions. Diversity is hard work, and you are intentionally and purposefully combining it with the other hard work of ensuring that we meet the LEAP challenge. That is, to meet the 21st century realities and needs of all students. Both diversity and liberal education are under attack. And as our President Carol Schneider wisely reminded me recently, when I was down in the dumps a bit, she said, we must maintain a critical distance between larger movement accomplishments versus local tribulations. I like that, local tribulations, you know, puts them in their place, right? Thus, when you meet setbacks, undeserved criticism, profound misunderstandings, or the like, as you most likely already have, you will gain sustenance and further inspiration from your colleagues here and from the overarching achievements, because they are your achievements. It's so important to understand that you are part of a movement. That inspiration should embolden you in challenging times, either to try again or reassess and draw on your other skills or other opportunities to advance diversity. Your work is part of a huge evolutionary task with many dimensions, a task that, as many have pointed out over the years, must extend beyond our lifetimes. The civil rights and women's movements and the legal cases upon which they were built mark the beginning of this task. Now, to be successful in realizing the potential of the diversity in this nation, we must not only expand that work, but also employ institutional strategies to ensure that it continues evolving. Such strategies should persist in developing diversity in its many dimensions, attending continually to enhance student learning, to conceptualize and reconceptualize student success for all students, taking into consideration what they bring to our institutions, as Jose and George have demonstrated. Through the curriculum change and student support work, that we ensure that students attain knowledge and skills for lifelong learning and civic engagement. We can therefore influence the evolution of higher education to be truly student and human-centered, fulfilling America's oft-forgotten promise. That's our movement. Diversity is inclusive of its composition of students, faculty, and staff from diverse backgrounds. It is not monolithic and reflects multiple and intersecting identities. It is inclusive in scholarship, curriculum, content, methodologies, and pedagogies. It is inclusive in processes of supporting learning, and it is reflective of historical and contemporaneous experiences and ways of being. Diversity is also multiple and complex, knowledge-based, affective, intellectual, interdisciplinary, interactive, experiential, domestic, and international. Engaging diversity in as many dimensions as possible inspires intellectual curiosity, self-reflection, and empathy, as we saw with the USC students yesterday. Diversity is simply present in all its richness, multiplicity, and complexity. It is there for us to engage and build on. It is a basic characteristic of our environment and humanity. Our individual and multiple intersecting identities produce personal, group, national, and international narratives. When those narratives are distorted, and or denied, then, as our students yesterday told us, you don't trust the things happening in your head, and fear and uncertainty limit your ability to realize dreams. To achieve diversity's potential, we have to recognize that we are striving for this goal in treacherous times, in particular anti-Black and anti-Hispanic racism that is arguably the strongest foe of diversity. This racism creates the atmosphere that exacerbates the other isms and models behaviors and perpetuate bigotry. That atmosphere causes even the well-intentioned or at least the stand off from one another. A December 2014 Gallup poll that I've put up here, and I don't have a pointer, I'm sorry, revealed race relations or racism as the most important problem in the United States. And it's climbed dramatically to 13%, the highest figure Gallup has reported since a finding of 15% in 1992 in the midst of the Rodney King verdict. In November, race relations racism was cited by 1% of the public as the most important problem. 9% of whites versus 22% of non-whites identified race relations and racism as the most important problem facing the country today. Gallup notes that whether this public concern persists, as in the civil rights era when 52% identified race relations, racism as the major problem, is the question. As you see on the chart, it is tied with the economy now. You see the 13, so the economy is that green line on top coming to 13%, and racism moving from 1% up to 13% now. There is data that seems to indicate that this public concern might persist, ironically, due to the increasing prevalence of overt expressions of racism. Racism continues to be on the rise. A 2012 Associated Press survey indicated that 51% of Americans expressed explicit anti-Black attitudes versus 48% in 2008. While 56% manifested implicit anti-Black attitudes versus 49% in 2008. The same survey indicated that 52% of non-Hispanic whites expressed explicit anti-Hispanic attitudes, while 57% manifested implicit anti-Hispanic attitude. There is no data for comparison. Finally, the survey also found that 79% of Republicans and versus 32% of Democrats expressed racial prejudice in questions measuring explicit racism, while 55% of Democrats and 64% of Republicans and 49% of independents held anti-Black feelings in the implicit test. Scary, isn't it? Patricia Williams, in the current March issue of The Nation, delineates what she identifies as the assault on memory from Mosul to Moscow to Dresden to Dhaka, the destruction of ancient monuments, scientific archives, and schools, the destruction of journalists as well as of journalism itself. Concurrent with this international threat to memory, Williams delineates the alarming trend of officially sanctioned oblivion in the United States. A few that she lists are, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker's attempted removal of the word "search for truth" from the 100-year-old mission statement of the state university system there. The University of North Carolina's Board of Governors' recent elimination of the Center on Poverty, Work, and Opportunity, of the Center for Biodiversity, and the elimination of the Institute for Civic Engagement and Social Change. The Arizona State Legislature's banning of Latin American studies from public school curricula. She provides many other examples, however, two of which diversity advocates for inclusive curricula might find very disconcerting are: one, the bill passed in the Oklahoma legislature to slash public funding for advanced placement history courses, fearing they are neither positive nor Christian enough. Not Chicano studies courses, not Asian American studies courses, not Black studies courses, going right to the core of liberal education, the history courses, fearing they are neither positive nor Christian enough. And she also delineates the nationwide ignorance of the history of lynching, its pervasiveness and entertainment dimension that's in the fabric of our memories, and the documented lynchings of African Americans from 1877 to 1950. Even in those documentations, they don't include other lynchings during that period in Arizona, Ohio, New Mexico, Michigan, and California, where African Americans, Mexicans, Chinese, Jews, and Indians were also lynched without consequence. Professor Williams gets at the heart of the matter when she asserts that knowing the traumatic landscape from which we arise does not make our polity weaker or less loved. To the contrary, we see. Unfortunately, as one of the students said yesterday, often she has to add to the narratives in the classroom to connect her group's story to make greater sense of the subject at hand. On the other hand, as Ian Haney Lopez states in the introduction to his recent book, which you've all got to read, Dog Whistle Politics. Am I doing the right thing here? I keep forgetting this thing. Okay. Dog Whistle Politics, How Coded Racial Appeals Have Reinvented Racism and Wrecked the Middle Class. He says race constitutes the dark magic by which middle-class voters have been convinced to turn government over to the wildly affluent, notwithstanding the harm this does to the white and non-white alike, to awaken them to the importance of race to their fate. He contends that we will not pull government back to the side of the broad middle until we confront the power of racial politics. What he's talking about is coded racial appeals that began with George Wallace, extended to Richard Nixon to win elections, morphed into strategic racism, beginning with Ronald Reagan, that Lopez demonstrates encourages the middle class to vote against its own interest. Strategic racism refers to purposeful efforts to use racial animus as a leverage to gain material wealth, political power, or heightened social standing. You've heard it. I'm totally against the N-word, and I'm all for immigration. But we all know there are people who are lazy and prone to crime, many of whom are in prison now, and many who take opportunities away from our children. Such coded racial appeals cause great anxiety among people of color of all ages. Furthermore, in spite of what we see as our dire situation nationally and internationally, or feel, many say they are tired of diversity. In businesses and on our campuses, we hear of diversity fatigue. Can you imagine that? Businesses have identified diversity fatigue as a problem, describing it as a form of mental exhaustion brought on by the constant attention required to ensure a workforce or other group is ethnically or racially diverse. It includes gender, sexual identity, class, and physical ability to different degrees in this fatigue. Two obvious symptoms of diversity fatigue in higher education are tiring of diversity work that does not seem related to one's work or one's goals, and disinterest in diversity activities. Sometimes morphing into diversity hostility, diversity fatigue will continue as long as diversity, whatever kind of diversity, is viewed and included as an add-on. By comparison, for example, students will easily tire of interdisciplinary work if it is simply added on, unintegrated, and disconnected from understanding the use of discipline-based methodology or significant topics in a course. It'll feel like busy work with no purpose but the instructor's interest or desire. So too, diversity as an add-on appears to many students like a special interest of an LGBTQ advocacy, or, for example, unwarranted attention to international students or Native students, making them comfortable and those who belong uncomfortable. You know it, okay. As an add-on with little attention to institutional ownership, diversity efforts can create resentment, competition, and encourage prejudice towards others. These responses are then exacerbated and reinforced by curricula that is disconnected from our nation's multicultural past, and often only with internationalization of the curriculum do we study diversity. A broad look at Generation Z, I don't know what the next generation they're going to call, Okay, go back, we're finished, right? I don't know. Go to A, I think, probably. A broad look at Generation Z suggests to me that such problems are likely to develop further if we do not provide them with historical, literary, socioeconomic context in their studies and signature opportunities. Unlike prior generations, they are not transitioning to a digital environment. They are largely, this is their environment, and they are largely individualistic. The digital is the only environment known to them. Born between 1992 and 2010, this generation is of great interest, especially to marketers. So I looked at what marketers were saying and extracted from them a few characteristics salient to us. Today, most are in their early teens. They are 18% of the world's population, the largest generation group in the United States. They are digitally over-connected. They multitask at least 5 screens, across at least 5 screens daily. I want to watch my time, but I'm going to interrupt myself in a minute. At Thanksgiving, my husband and I invited 4 Brazilian students who were at Spelman to have dinner with us. And so my husband's a retired history professor, so he was ready for conversation and everything, and they were delighted to have this conversation. And I saw them, a delight I hadn't seen in Isabel's face, the student that I knew the most. And she said, "This is wonderful. She really said this, we're really talking." I said, "Don't you do that?" And she said, she actually said, "No." I said, "Well, what are you doing when I see you sitting in the cafeteria with others?" She said, "We text to each other across the table." Can you believe that? Believe it. Okay? Okay. Therefore, they have very few verbal communication skills. Communicate with speed, emoticons, and emojis instead of words. They are imprecise communicators. They prefer rapid-fire commentary and banter with lots of room for interpretation. They prefer to work independently, and we're trying to get teamwork, right? Individualistic with strong regard for privacy and personal freedom. They're less active. Online gaming is their main entertainment. Teen obesity has tripled since 1971 and 2010, we know. They want to change the world. They do want to have an impact on the world, these surveys say. 60% want to have an impact, compared with 39% of millennials. Advanced college degrees are less important to them, with 64% considering an advanced degree, compared with 71% of millennials. We need to do a whole talk on that. 72%, a lot of research on that, 72% of high school students today want to start a business. Supercapitalism is now hypercapitalism. It's there in their minds. Want to start a business. 61% rather be an entrepreneur than an employee when they graduate. It's predicted that they will be the most traditionalist generation since the 70s, with decisions based more likely on conversations with their families. So there's a strong thread of inward-directed individualism and limited interest in the world beyond them that conflicts with their desire to make change. So as I see it, one of the questions is, how do we institutionalize the kinds of processes, programs, and curricula you are suggesting in your presentations, and that ensure liberal education and our processes of broad, inclusive learning advance to inclusive excellence and student success? How do we continue to build on the diversity work that has been done prior to now, adjust it to our changing student generations, and have diversity become a way of being and doing in higher education? Diversity goals and processes must permeate institutions. And I've heard many of you talk about strategic planning and where to put diversity in strategic planning. So they must permeate the institutions. I suggest that we think about these goals as transformational practices for diversity, or TDPs, to institutionalize diversity as lived, evolving guiding principles integrated into the institution, its departments and divisions. And working on this a little bit, I came up with 10, perhaps. First, establish cross-institutional goals for diversity in the curriculum, student support, faculty development, and staff development. Second, involve intentional leadership across the institution. Your president, the president's team, the faculty senate, department chairs, student government, key student associations, staff leadership, all have to be involved in developing TDPs for the institution. I always get it wrong. My husband said, stop saying TDPs, it's TPDs, you made it up. You know, I mean, you do it wrong, you know? But anyhow, so I reverse it all the time. TPDs, and establishes processes for reviewing and continuous development that engages faculty governance. And that is faculty governance is real important to be a part of this. Establish an office, and many of you have done this, responsible for the assessment of and facilitating institutional change across silos, so that there is collaboration between student affairs and academic affairs on key diversity initiatives, bringing cohesion to the campus-wide leadership. So that synergy between academic and student affairs is really key, and someone has to monitor that, facilitate it, encourage it, and the structure has to reflect it in some way. Include TPDs as continuous components of strategic planning, informing goals across the institution, and as part of environmental scans for planning institutionally and departmentally. Identify institutional TPDs for faculty hiring and leadership, staff hiring and leadership, student admission and retention, connecting all to student success goals and initiatives. Involve and support continuously faculty development to identify and realize TPDs for teaching, learning, advising, and student support. Through faculty leadership, include expectations of transformative diversity in faculty evaluations. Provide, through faculty development and partnering with student affairs, a multicultural inclusive curriculum. This is something we've really failed in doing, emphasizing connected learning, common intellectual experiences that help students make sense of the world and their potential. Have ethnic studies and your other departments. Have synergies between those departments. Involve student leaders and groups in identifying TPDs in student organizations and student affairs initiatives. Involve and support continuously staff development and implementation of TPDs in their work. Include expectations of transformative diversity in performance evaluations. The goal is to develop a diversity in action consciousness that permeates the institution or a unit and units that becomes over time woven in the fabric of the institution. At the least, a campus should strive for a can-do atmosphere, inspiring and supporting high expectations for inclusive diversity, no matter its size or funding. Engaging diversity is necessary to the success of all students, just as challenging strategic racism is vital to the sustenance of the middle class. In conclusion, a few weeks ago, going through boxes of family memorabilia, I came across my mother's lesson plans from the late 1930s, early 40s, when she taught in one-room schools in Southwest Virginia, and my father's goals for his first years as assistant superintendent for student personnel in Alexandria, Virginia in the late 1960s. They either taught or were administrators for 40 years in Virginia. Going through those boxes, I recall many conversations at the dinner table about teaching and the challenges of both segregation and integration. From it feels like the time I was born, I must have been listening in the womb. I also recall, because I couldn't do anything else that I'm doing but now, given them, that's it. I also recall the former students from Gogginsville and Appomattox and other small towns that my parents taught coming to my parents' funerals. Students who had become teachers, administrators, lawyers, ministers, and physicians, many from one-room or four-room elementary segregated schools, all from segregated schools. Each attributed their success to the caring my parents demonstrated for them while teaching, guiding or helping them plan for their futures. They said there was no doubt ever expressed about their eventual success, first as good, knowledgeable human beings, and second, as potential contributors to society in their chosen work. I also came across the first paper I wrote as an undergraduate in college, a one-page response to one of the late historian Edmund S. Morgan's Yale lectures. Among other things, I wrote about the importance of embracing change, for using curiosity for, quote, a new and better life for humankind. And most important, I urge faculty to see as their first responsibility in their students to nurture that growth and curiosity. I could see, as one of the only 3 black students in my class, the need for my curiosity to be nurtured and the need for me to be cared about. The bottom line is that demonstrative caring and nurtured curiosity must be the underlying generative components of all the programs and initiatives we develop to advance student success. Demonstrative caring and nurtured curiosity. We saw the great need for informative and knowledgeable caring in the opening plenary on Thursday. We saw the results of truly caring, mentoring, and the development of curiosity in the students yesterday. And as George said yesterday, we must not let the vulnerability and honesty in good mentoring get lost in the rush of institutional goals. We won't lose good mentoring characteristics if we develop and institutionalize transformative practices of diversity, realizing and changing the depth and force of the resistance to diversity that, ironically, is at the core of our American dream. The work you are doing is necessary for our students and for the maintenance and evolution of civic engagement and democracy. It's necessary for the nation. And most important, for our underrepresented students, our swirling students, our traumatized and gifted students, our students who feel like they do not belong, you are their greatest resource, for you are ensuring that they will have the atmosphere and structures to allow them to succeed. You are assuring that they are able to trust that the things happening inside their heads can be real, as Maria Plasencia said yesterday. You are assuring that they will not allow fear to limit their ability to dream, as Debbie Rambo put it yesterday. If you think about it, these are goals that all students need. That is why doing a good job with the underrepresented, with inclusivity and diversity, we will model the ultimate changes we so desperately need for all students in higher education in the United States. Thank you.